We wanted to make drum programming easier, faster, more powerful, more experimental, and even help you get started on the right foot if you're new to all of this. That's why we've introduced the drum sequencer player. If you know and have used the players already included with Reason, then you can probably already imagine the same concepts apply here. Drum Sequencer is, all at once, a support tool for helping you get started, an efficient tool for quick beat construction, and an advanced tool for things not otherwise possible in Reason's sequencer. To get started, let's drag a Kong drum designer into our rack and add a drum sequencer player above it. By default, the 8 pattern lanes in the drum sequencer player are set up to correspond with the first 8 pads on Kong or the first 8 channels on the red drum. That means we can get right down to business programming patterns. Drum Sequencer has 16 steps per pattern lane, which by default correspond to the 16th notes in one bar of music. Programming on a basic pattern is just a matter of toggling on steps for the kick, like on every quarter note of our 16-step bar. And then, let's add a snare drum. Our snare is on lane 2, which I can verify if I wanted to by clicking its number to audition it. And if you're the type of music maker who likes tidy labels and notes, we could label our lane as such too. I'll toggle on beat 2 and 4 of our snare, press the Run button, and already we've a foundational beat for approximately 3,288 genres of music. I could click and drag across our hi-hat lane to paint in hi-hats on every 16th note in our bar. Or I could toggle off every other step for a less frenetic 8th note pattern. When any lane is selected, you see that we have a corresponding velocity lane where we can adjust the velocity and therefore the relative volume of each step in our pattern. So for example, if we take this highly robotic pattern and simply add some dynamics to every other hi-hat step, instantly our pattern gains a little musical feel to it. Step patterns don't have to be every beat or every 8th note either. It's up to you to choose where you draw in steps or leave gaps to create interesting contours to your musical pattern. For example, if I added a shaker pattern on lane 7, I could draw in some steps, maybe leave a gap, draw in some more, leave a gap, and maybe one more. Wait a second, is this? Yeah, this sort of reminds me of... Oh no, shut it down guys, shut it down. Whew, that was a close one. Let's get out of danger by trying something else. I can clear out individual lanes here, or to start over I can clear the whole pattern globally up top. Let's load up another type of Kong drum kit useful for house-style club beats. And let's draw in a couple steps for a basic house beat. 4 on the floor kicks, backbeat snare, and disco hi-hats that play off of open and closed patterns. How about a clap accent on the 4th beat, too? House drums need to swing, so let's adjust the shuffle up so our hats aren't quite so straight. While our drums now have some swing, they're still a bit repetitive because our pattern is predictable. The next phase of drum programming is all about adding variation to keep our drums from being so monotonous. One way to do that is to alter our pattern. The drum sequencer player has 8 patterns where we can program entirely different beats, fills, and turnarounds. Let's select pattern 2, and you'll see we have a blank canvas to make a whole new pattern. But if we just want to alter the pattern we already made, we don't need to start from scratch. If we go back to pattern 1 momentarily and switch to copy-paste, you'll see that, just like we had the ability to clear individual lanes, we have the same ability to copy and paste individual lanes to other lanes within the same pattern, or in this case, we could use this global copy button and then go over to pattern 2 to paste our whole pattern across. Now let's make an alteration, like an extra clap right before the pattern cycles around. We could also go to pattern 3 and paste our pattern in again for a little turnaround variation. We'll add an extra snare hit with a lower velocity leading into the last beat and a clap on the upbeat. We can automate pattern switches in the sequencer just like you might with a Dr. Octarex, Matrix Pattern Sequencer, or Red Drum. I'll right-click the patterns and choose Edit Automation to create a pattern lane in the sequencer where I can draw in 4 bars, selecting pattern 2 on the second measure and pattern 3 on the fourth. Now we have a more varied drum sequence that switches to a variation on bar 2, and then a turnaround for a complete 4-bar pattern. There are, of course, other ways to introduce variation and character into our drum programming, and some of them get downright experimental. One way is using what's called polyrhythms. Instead of automating pattern switches to get variation, we can use simple math. I'll show you what I mean back on pattern 1. Instead of this clap, let's turn off that step and program some steps on lanes 7 and 8, which are these cowbell-style percussive sounds. We'll just pepper some hits in, mostly on the downbeats. Initially, my 16-step pattern is back to feeling repetitive. But what if we weren't making only 16-step patterns? What if I shortened this percussion to, say, 14 steps? Now our percussion isn't playing 4 beats per cycle, it's playing 3.5 beats every cycle. And when we stack that shorter 14-step percussion cycle up against our 16-step kick, snare, and hats, we end up with patterns that don't loop evenly. Each cycle, our percussion pattern falls a half beat behind our other drums, which makes for interesting syncopation and variation. As these two patterns cycle out of sync more and more each time, they would eventually match back up after 112 steps. But we can force them to restart their cycles for a more musical grouping of 4 bars, for example. If we set reset step to 64, which is 4 bars of 16 steps, our mismatched cycling polyrhythms will reset after 4 bars in our song for a pattern that has mathematically generated variation but a musical 4-bar length. Polyrhythms can get very experimental, and the drum sequencer comes with a collection of patches, some of which are already set up for polyrhythmic experimentation. But let's move our focus over to another style of drums to talk about drum sequencers' more advanced methods of altering and spicing up your patterns. We've got this electric keys and bass idea here. Let's load one of Reason Drum Supply's R&B kits and start putting together a little pattern. The musical style might change, but our workflow doesn't. I want to make a kick, snare, and hi-hat pattern as a foundation. Snares go on 2 and 4 as usual, but at these slower tempos, I can have busier kick drums with more feel to them. Just like the house style, I'll turn up the shuffle for some swing. For the hi-hats, I could draw in patterns like we've been doing, but I could also get some happy accident help from Drum Sequencer's random function. I just roll the dice, and each time I click, I get a randomized pattern of hi-hats that might inspire me. I'll look for something fairly busy to try out. Okay, I like that one. Let's see how things are sounding with our other instruments. It's nice, but we're back in that familiar position of having a nice pattern, yet one in need of some variation and spice. For slow jam styles like this, one way to add sonic spice is dial in some imperfection. Let me show you what I mean. I've got 2 snare drums in this Kong kit. This one, which I'm using for my backbeat, and this clap style sound. I'll add 1 step on beat 2 with my first snare to stack the sounds. Right now, you can hardly hear that there's 2 samples on beat 2 because the snare and clap are perfectly aligned. Drum Sequencer includes the ability to slide a pattern lane slightly ahead or behind the beat. If we slide snare 1 backwards ahead of the beat and push snare 2 a bit after the beat, you can hear our stacked snares now feel distinct, and our slow jam beat feels looser to match the mood. In addition to the slide controls, we can also change each pattern lane's playback speed or direction. For example, with our hi-hats, let's change the direction from forward to backward, and you'll see that while most of our pattern cycles left to right, our hi-hat pattern plays in the opposite direction from right to left. If we set it to pendulum, it starts in sync with our other pattern lanes, but when they loop back to step 1 to repeat, our hi-hats will boomerang backwards instead. This effectively turns our 1-bar drum pattern into a 2-bar pattern with built-in hi-hat variations. Let's add an open hi-hat that also follows the pendulum behavior for some extra smooth factor. By now, you can see how Drum Sequencer helps you build up patterns and then experiment with them using randomization, timing alterations, and directional variation. Now let's talk about some of the coolest tools in Drum Sequencer: probability and repeats. To illustrate probability, let's switch to what might feel like the polar opposite of R&B: country music. Country brushes like this are critical to the feel of the whole song. If I take these away, we lose the entire sense of movement and pulse. While it may sound like our drummer is just chugging along and peppering in little dynamic variations now and again when it moves him, it's actually all happening courtesy of Drum Sequencer's probability settings. Let's solo the drums. The kit is a pretty simple collection of samples: a kick, a hi-hat, and then a series of light, medium, and heavy snare samples being played with brushes. I've set the playback speed to the kick lane to half time, so I get 2 measures of kick variation for every cycle through its pattern. Lane 7 is our main snare hit. The basic part is a simple backbeat rhythm. But the main flourish of a country brush pattern is snare hits on each side of this backbeat at lower velocity, like this. You can instantly hear how repetitive and robotic it gets. Real drummers don't play this 3-snare figure every time. So watch. Probability is exactly what it sounds like. If I dial down the probability, I can decide how often a step will trigger, say 33% for this one and 25% for this one. And let's remove these 2 steps and dial back the probability here, here, and on these 2 as well. Now what we've got is a pattern that's been engineered for chance. Our main backbeat is still solid. Those will trigger every time. But the hollow steps will only happen roughly every 3rd time, every 4th time, or less depending on how the probability works out each cycle. What it means for us is that no 2 cycles are the same. The other lighter brush samples are just sprinkled in randomly to create constant motion underneath. Once they're in place, you'll hear our drummer is playing random dynamics for softer and harder hits in a way we don't have to program by hand, and in a way that's always changing subtly. Okay, let's switch gears yet again. Probability, and its super cool neighbor down there, repeats, are useful for all sorts of styles. If you're thinking about glitchier drums, well, so am I. So let's check out this song. We've got the start of a drum pattern already, and you'll start to recognize some previous topics right away. We've slowed the speed of some lanes down for longer patterns each cycle, and we've got some hollow probability steps that only sound occasionally. One thing we don't have at all in this pattern is hi-hats. Hi-hat patterns can benefit from drum sequencer's repeats section with glitchy genres, trap, drum and bass, and many other styles. To introduce the concept of repeats, let's first add some basic ones to our snare. Just like we dialed down the probability to alter a step, we can dial up the repeats for each step to increase the number of triggers inside that step. So for example, let's just dial up this snare to 2. You can see its step has now split in half, with 2 hits occupying the same space. Let's solo just the snare to hear the result. We can dial up repeats for some of the other probability steps too. Now, on to the hi-hats to play more with the repeats concept. Instead of programming hi-hats here on our Kong, let's bring in another drum instrument. The one great thing about the drum sequencer player is that it turns every drum library and every plugin into a drum machine. Battery 4 by Native Instruments is a very popular drum plugin, but it doesn't have its own built-in pattern sequencer. So by adding a drum sequencer above it in our rack, we can program battery samples the same way we've been using Kong today. One key difference, though, is that battery doesn't map samples to the same keys every time. The kick drum isn't always on C1 on the keyboard. The hi-hat isn't always or even often on D1. So we need to teach drum sequencer what notes on battery we want to trigger. Drum sequencer has a learn button. When clicked, drum sequencer is listening to note input. So we can just go lane by lane searching for percussive hi-hat style sounds in this battery preset to add above our Kong drums already. When we've got a few, we click Learn again to exit the note assignment process and commit our MIDI notes to the lanes we've assigned. Now, instead of clicking in steps, let's use drum sequencer's record feature to play them in live. I activate recording, hit play on Reason's transport, and play my battery samples live on my keyboard. As I do, my performance is written into drum sequencer for me as steps. After I've got a few, I can click record again to exit this live input method, and now we can go about experimenting with altering some of these steps to be repeats. Half, thirds, fourths, and even faster repeat divisions for super quick hi-hat rolls and flutters. Inside the repeat options, we also have alternate note groupings like 16th and 8th note triplets and flams that mimic live drummer accents. When you get to customizing repeats, probability, speed, directional variation, slide, shuffle, and multiple pattern automation, you can see just how deep drum sequencer can go. But one great thing about players is that their deepness expands exponentially when you start combining them with other players. For drum sequencer, set aside its name right now. It's not actually a drum sequencer. It's really a note sequencer. And you've just learned how to have our players learn which notes you want to assign to each pattern lane. What would happen if we hooked up drum sequencer to a synth to play musical patterns instead of rhythm patterns? Let's not wonder. Let's find out. If we bring in a Europa synth and add a drum sequencer above it, we could enter learn mode and assign some notes. Then, we could do any number of techniques we've learned from clicking in steps, recording steps, or using the built-in random step generators or included step presets to populate our pattern. I've come up with this pattern that I like. What would be great is if this musical pattern could shift around to arpeggiate different chords, yet stay in the same musical key. And of course, this is where the modularity and creativity of players is most at home. Let's put note echo beneath the drum sequencer and set it up not as a note echo, but rather a note transposer using its pitch knob. And let's put a scales and chords player beneath note echo to keep all our notes inside the key of C minor. Watch what happens as I adjust the pitch knob of note echo to transpose my pattern around. That's Drum Sequencer. Like all players, its capability goes as deep as your imagination. Pattern-based workflows don't have to mean less variation. Hopefully, today you've seen they can actually mean more variation, more experimentation, and more musical ideas for you to cook up.